The morning sun streamed through the stained glass windows of St. Mary's Cathedral, casting rainbow patterns across the marble floor where Camilla Rodriguez stood adjusting her wedding dress. Her fingers trembled slightly as she touched the delicate pearl necklace at her throat, the same necklace her grandmother had worn on her wedding day 60 years ago. The pearls felt warm against her skin, carrying with them the weight of family tradition and generations of love stories. Camilla had always imagined this moment would feel different. Growing up, she had dreamed of her wedding day as a fairy tale, complete with butterflies in her stomach and overwhelming joy. Instead, she felt a strange mixture of excitement and an unexplained nervousness that settled deep in her chest like a cold stone. She attributed it to normal pre-wedding jitters, the kind every bride experiences when about to make the biggest commitment of her life. "You look absolutely radiant, sweetheart," her mother, Elena, said as she entered the small preparation room adjacent to the cathedral's main hall. Elena's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she took in the sight of her daughter in the flowing white gown that had taken months to perfect. The dress was a masterpiece of intricate lace and silk, with tiny seed pearls sewn into delicate patterns that caught the light with every movement. Camilla turned to face her mother, managing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thank you, Mama. I just want everything to be perfect today." She paused, her fingers unconsciously reaching for the necklace again. "Tell me again about Abuela's wedding day, about how she felt when she wore this necklace." Elena's expression softened as she approached her daughter, her hands reaching out to adjust a stray curl that had escaped from Camilla's elaborate updo. "Your grandmother told me that when she put on this necklace, she felt connected to all the women in our family who had worn it before her. She said it gave her strength and reminded her that true love always finds a way, even through the darkest times." The story had always comforted Camilla, but today it felt different somehow. Her grandmother, Isabella, had passed away just 2 years ago, taking with her a lifetime of stories and wisdom that Camilla now desperately wished she could access. Isabella had been the matriarch of their family, the one everyone turned to for advice and guidance. Her absence felt particularly acute on this important day. "I miss her so much, Mama," Camilla whispered, her voice barely audible above the distant sound of guests arriving in the main cathedral. "I keep thinking about what she would say if she were here today. Whether she would approve of Marcus, whether she would think I'm making the right decision." Elena placed her hands on her daughter's shoulders, looking directly into her eyes with the intensity that only a mother can possess. "Your grandmother loved you more than anything in this world, Camilla. She would want you to be happy, whatever that means for you. But more importantly, she would want you to listen to your own heart, to trust your instincts about what's right for your life." The words hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than either woman fully understood at that moment. Camilla nodded, trying to push away the small voice in the back of her mind that had been growing louder over the past few weeks. It was the voice that questioned whether she was marrying Marcus for the right reasons, whether love was enough to bridge the growing distance she felt between them. Marcus Henley was everything that looked good on paper. He came from a respected family, had a successful career in finance, and treated Camilla with what everyone described as devoted attention. Their courtship had been proper and predictable, following all the traditional steps that society expected. He had proposed with a stunning diamond ring and an expensive restaurant, surrounded by candles and roses, just as she had always imagined. But somewhere along the way, Camilla had begun to feel like she was playing a role in someone else's story rather than living her own life. The conversations with Marcus had become routine, focusing on practical matters like wedding planning, career goals, and future financial security. The spontaneous laughter they had shared in the early days of their relationship had gradually been replaced by polite exchanges and careful consideration of each other's feelings. "The guests are starting to arrive," Elena said gently, glancing at the small clock on the preparation room's antique dresser. "Your father is waiting outside to escort you down the aisle. Are you ready, Mija?" Camilla took a deep breath, her hand instinctively moving to the necklace one more time. The pearls felt heavier than usual, as if they carried the weight of all the decisions that had led to this moment. She had committed to this path, sent out invitations, planned every detail of the celebration. Everyone she loved was gathering to witness her pledge of eternal love to Marcus. "I'm ready," she said, though the words felt strange on her tongue. As they prepared to leave the small room, Camilla caught sight of herself in the full-length mirror that stood in the corner. The woman looking back at her was beautiful, elegant, and perfectly prepared for her wedding day. But there was something in her eyes that gave her pause, a flicker of uncertainty that she couldn't quite name or dismiss. The cathedral had filled with nearly 200 guests, a sea of familiar faces from both families and their wide circle of friends. The afternoon light filtering through the ancient stained glass created an almost ethereal atmosphere, with blues and golds dancing across the stone walls and wooden pews. The organ music began to swell, signaling that the ceremony was about to begin. Camilla's father, Roberto, appeared at her side, resplendent in his carefully pressed black suit. His eyes were bright with pride and emotion as he offered her his arm. Roberto had worked 2 jobs throughout Camilla's childhood to ensure she could pursue her education and dreams. Today represented not just his daughter's happiness, but the culmination of years of sacrifice and hope for her future. "You are the most beautiful bride I have ever seen," he whispered as they moved toward the cathedral's main entrance. "I'm so proud of the woman you have become, and I know you will build a wonderful life with Marcus." The processional music began, and Camilla could see the guests rising to their feet in anticipation of her entrance. Through the open doorway, she caught a glimpse of Marcus standing at the altar, handsome in his tailored tuxedo, his face serious and focused as he waited for his bride to join him. As they began their slow walk down the aisle, Camilla's mind wandered to a conversation she had overheard between her grandmother and mother several years ago. She had been a teenager then, hiding at the top of the stairs while the 2 women talked in hushed voices in the kitchen below. Her grandmother had been sharing stories about her own marriage, about the challenges she and Camilla's grandfather had faced during the early years of their union. "Marriage is not just about love," Isabella had said in her accented English, her voice carrying the wisdom of decades. "Love is the foundation, yes, but marriage is about choosing each other every single day, even when it's difficult. It's about being willing to grow together, to change together, to support each other's dreams, even when they don't match your own." At the time, the words had seemed abstract to teenage Camilla, more like philosophical musings than practical advice. But now, walking down the aisle toward her future, they resonated with a clarity that was almost unsettling. She found herself wondering if she and Marcus had that kind of deep connection, the willingness to support each other's authentic selves rather than the polished versions they presented to the world. The faces of the guests blurred together as she continued her procession, each step bringing her closer to a commitment that would define the rest of her life. She saw her college roommates, her cousins, family friends who had watched her grow up, and Marcus's relatives who had welcomed her warmly into their social circle. Everyone was smiling, their faces bright with joy and anticipation for the ceremony they were about to witness. But as Camilla neared the front of the cathedral, her attention was drawn to a figure sitting in the 3rd row on her side of the church. It was her grandmother's closest friend, Maria Santos, an elderly woman who had been like a second grandmother to Camilla throughout her childhood. Maria's face was kind, but serious, and when their eyes met, she gave Camilla a look that seemed to see straight through to her soul. Maria had been present for many of the important moments in Camilla's life, offering guidance and support with a gentle wisdom that reminded her so much of Isabella. In that moment of eye contact, Camilla felt as though Maria could sense her inner turmoil, the questions and doubts that she had been trying so hard to suppress in the weeks leading up to the wedding. The ceremony proceeded according to the carefully planned schedule. The priest, Father Martinez, had known Camilla's family for decades and had baptized her as an infant in this very cathedral. His voice carried the authority and warmth of someone who had presided over countless weddings, baptisms, and funerals, marking the significant passages in the lives of his parishioners. "Dearly beloved," Father Martinez began, his voice echoing through the vaulted space. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of Camilla Elena Rodriguez and Marcus James Henley in the sacrament of holy matrimony. Marriage is a sacred covenant, blessed by God, and entered into with joy, reverence, and the full understanding of the commitment being made." As the priest continued with the traditional opening words of the ceremony, Camilla found her mind drifting to the last conversation she had with her grandmother before Isabella's death. They had been sitting on the covered porch of Isabella's small house, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Isabella had been frail then, her once strong hands thin and delicate, but her mind remained sharp and her heart full of love for her family. "Mija," Isabella had said, taking Camilla's hand in her own, "I want you to promise me something. When the time comes for you to choose a life partner, don't just choose with your head or even with your heart alone. Choose with your whole soul. Choose someone who sees the real you, who loves not just the woman you are now, but the woman you are still becoming." Camilla had promised, not fully understanding the depth of her grandmother's words at the time. She had been younger then, more focused on her career and education than on romantic relationships. But now, standing at the altar next to Marcus, she wondered if she had kept that promise or if she had simply chosen the safest, most logical option available to her. The ceremony continued with readings from family members and friends, each passage carefully selected to reflect the couple's hopes for their future together. Marcus's sister read from Corinthians about love being patient and kind, while Camilla's cousin shared a passage from the book of Ruth about commitment and devotion. Through it all, Camilla maintained her composure, smiling at the appropriate moments and responding when prompted by Father Martinez. But internally, she felt as though she were watching the ceremony from a distance, as if she were an observer rather than a participant in her own wedding. When the time came for the exchange of vows, Marcus spoke first, his voice steady and confident as he recited the words they had written together during their pre-marriage counseling sessions. He spoke about partnership, respect, and building a stable future together. His words were beautiful and sincere, but they felt more like a business proposal than a declaration of passionate love. Then it was Camilla's turn. She had practiced her vows dozens of times, memorizing every word and inflection. But as she began to speak, looking into Marcus's eyes, she felt a strange disconnection from the words coming out of her mouth. She was saying all the right things about love and commitment and shared dreams, but somewhere deep inside, a small voice was whispering that something was missing. The moment arrived for the exchange of rings, and Marcus slipped the wedding band onto Camilla's finger with careful precision. The gold felt cold against her skin, and she noticed that her hand was trembling slightly as she reached for Marcus's ring to complete the exchange. Father Martinez smiled warmly at the couple as they completed this traditional portion of the ceremony. "And now," he said, his voice carrying throughout the cathedral, "by the power vested in me by God and the state, I pronounce you husband and wife. Marcus, you may kiss your bride." As Marcus leaned in to kiss her, Camilla closed her eyes and tried to feel the joy and completion that this moment was supposed to bring. But instead of fireworks or overwhelming emotion, she felt only a gentle sadness, as if she were saying goodbye to some part of herself that she couldn't quite identify. The kiss was tender and appropriate, witnessed by the 200 guests who erupted in applause and cheers as the newly married couple turned to face them. The organ music swelled triumphantly, and flower petals began to fall from the balcony above as the wedding party prepared to process back down the aisle. But as they began their walk as husband and wife, something unexpected happened. The clasp of Camilla's pearl necklace, weakened perhaps by the emotional stress of the day or simply by the passage of 60 years, suddenly gave way. The precious pearls scattered across the marble floor of the cathedral with a sound like rain, rolling in every direction as the necklace broke apart completely. Camilla gasped and instinctively reached for her throat, but it was too late. Her grandmother's necklace, the symbol of family tradition and enduring love, had broken at the very moment she had committed herself to Marcus forever. The guests murmured in concern and surprise, many of them bending to help collect the scattered pearls. But as Camilla knelt to gather the broken pieces of her grandmother's necklace, her fingers encountered something unexpected among the pearls. There, lying on the cold marble floor, was a small piece of paper that had apparently been hidden inside the hollow space of the necklace's clasp. The paper was yellowed with age and folded so small that it was barely visible among the scattered pearls. With trembling hands, Camilla picked up the tiny note, her heart pounding with a mixture of curiosity and inexplicable dread. Around her, the wedding guests continued their celebration, unaware that their bride had just discovered something that would change everything she thought she knew about love, marriage, and the legacy her grandmother had left behind. The small piece of paper felt impossibly fragile between Camilla's fingers as she stood in the cathedral's vestry, having excused herself from the receiving line with a whispered explanation about needing a moment to recover from the shock of the broken necklace. Marcus had been understanding, though she could see the concern in his eyes as she slipped away with her mother and maid of honor, Jessica. The vestry was quiet compared to the celebration continuing in the main hall, where guests mingled and congratulated each other on the beautiful ceremony. Camilla's hands shook as she carefully unfolded the tiny note, aware that this fragile piece of paper might crumble at the slightest wrong movement. The handwriting was faded, but unmistakably her grandmother's, written in the careful script that Isabella had learned as a young girl in Mexico. "What does it say, sweetheart?" Elena asked softly, moving closer to her daughter. Jessica stood by the door, ensuring their privacy while occasionally glancing back with worried concern. Camilla's voice was barely a whisper as she read the words that would haunt her for the rest of her life. "My dearest Camilla, if you are reading this, then you have found yourself at a crossroads, just as I once did. The necklace breaks only when the heart knows what the mind refuses to accept. I wore this necklace on my wedding day to a good man I did not love, because it was expected, because it was safe, because I was afraid to disappoint those who cared for me. I spent 40 years wondering about the path I did not take, about the man I left behind, because he was not what my family wanted for me. Do not make my mistake. True love is worth any sacrifice, any hardship, any disapproval. Choose your heart, Mija. Choose love. Choose yourself. With all my love and regrets, Abuela Isabella." The words hit Camilla like a physical blow, stealing the breath from her lungs and sending her heart racing. She read the note again, then a third time, each reading making the message more real and more devastating. Her grandmother, the woman she had idealized as the perfect wife and mother, had lived her entire marriage regretting the choice she had made on her wedding day. "Camilla, what's wrong?" Elena asked, her voice sharp with concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Without speaking, Camilla handed the note to her mother, watching as Elena's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, shock, recognition, and, finally, a deep sadness that seemed to age her years in moments. Elena's hands trembled as she finished reading, and she slowly sank into one of the wooden chairs that lined the small room. "I had no idea," Elena whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She never said anything, never gave any indication that she was anything but happy with Grandpa Miguel. They seemed so devoted to each other. Camilla felt as though the ground beneath her feet had shifted, as if everything she had believed about her family's history had been revealed as an elaborate fiction. But they were happy, weren't they? I remember them together. They laughed together. They took care of each other. Grandpa Miguel was so gentle with her, so loving. They were content, Elena said carefully, as if she were piecing together a puzzle that had been missing crucial pieces for decades. They built a good life together. They raised their children with love and dedication. But now I'm remembering things differently. The way your grandmother would sometimes stare off into the distance with such longing in her eyes. The time I found her crying while looking through old photographs, and she claimed it was just the dust making her eyes water. Jessica, who had been quietly listening from her position by the door, finally spoke up. Camilla, honey, what are you going to do? The reception is starting, and Marcus is probably wondering where you are. The mention of Marcus sent another wave of shock through Camilla's system. She had just married him less than an hour ago, had made solemn vows in front of God and all their loved ones. But now she felt as though she had been living in a dream, going through the motions of a life that wasn't authentically hers. I need to know more about this, Camilla said, her voice growing stronger with determination. Mother, who is this man that Abuela left behind? Did you know anything about him? Elena was quiet for a long moment, her brow furrowed in concentration as she searched through decades of memories and conversations. There was a name she sometimes mentioned when she thought I wasn't listening. Antonio. She would say it so softly, usually when she was looking through old letters or photographs. I always assumed he was a cousin or family friend from Mexico. Antonio, Camilla repeated, the name feeling strange on her tongue. She tried to imagine her grandmother as a young woman, facing the same kind of impossible choice that now confronted her. Do you think he's still alive? Do you think she ever tried to contact him after she married Grandpa Miguel? I don't know, sweetheart. Your grandmother was a very private person about certain things. She shared stories about her childhood, about coming to America, about raising her children. But there were always gaps, periods of her life that she never talked about. The door to the vestry opened, and Marcus appeared, his face a mixture of concern and slight irritation. He looked handsome in his tuxedo, every inch the perfect groom, but Camilla felt a strange detachment as she looked at him, as if she were seeing him clearly for the first time. Camilla, what's going on? Everyone's asking about you. The photographer wants to take the formal family portraits, and dinner will be served soon. His eyes moved to the crumpled note in Elena's hands and the scattered pearls that Jessica had carefully gathered into a small cloth bag. Is everything okay with the necklace? We can have it repaired. Camilla looked at her new husband, this man she had just promised to love and honor for the rest of her life, and felt a crushing weight of guilt and confusion. How could she explain that she had just discovered her entire understanding of love and marriage had been built on a foundation of secrets and regrets? The necklace is more than broken, she said quietly. It's revealed something that changes everything. Marcus stepped closer, his expression shifting to genuine concern. What do you mean? Camilla, you're starting to worry me. What could a piece of jewelry reveal that would be so upsetting? Elena stood up, still holding the note, and looked at her new son-in-law with something approaching pity. Marcus, perhaps you should sit down. There's something we need to discuss, something that affects all of us. For the next 20 minutes, Camilla and her mother explained the discovery of the note and its contents. Marcus listened with increasing bewilderment and frustration, clearly struggling to understand why a message from a dead grandmother should have any impact on their wedding day or their future together. I don't understand, Marcus said finally, his voice tight with controlled emotion. Your grandmother made a choice 60 years ago that she later regretted. How does that change anything about us? We're not them, Camilla. We're building our own life together. Camilla wanted to agree with him, wanted to dismiss her grandmother's words as the ramblings of an old woman looking back on her life through the distorted lens of nostalgia and regret. But something deep inside her recognized the truth in Isabella's message, saw her own situation reflected in the difficult choice her grandmother had faced decades earlier. Marcus, when you think about us, about our relationship, do you feel passionate about me? Not fond, not comfortable, not satisfied. Passionate. Like you can't imagine your life without me. Like being apart from me is physically painful. Marcus looked taken aback by the directness of her question. Camilla, what kind of question is that? Of course I love you. We're partners. We're building something together. Passion is for teenagers and romance novels. What we have is more mature than that. His answer, meant to be reassuring, instead confirmed Camilla's growing certainty that she had made the same mistake as her grandmother. She had chosen safety over authenticity, approval over love, the expected path over the one that called to her heart. But what if passion is exactly what marriage should be built on? She asked, her voice growing stronger with each word. What if settling for comfortable and practical means settling for a half-life? You're being ridiculous, Marcus said, though his voice betrayed his growing panic. You're letting an old woman's regrets poison what should be the happiest day of our lives. We made commitments today, Camilla, in front of God and our families. You can't just change your mind because of a note that might have been written by someone who was confused or bitter or simply afraid of dying with regrets. Elena, who had remained quiet during this exchange, finally spoke up. Marcus, I think what my daughter is trying to say is that she's realizing she may have married you for the wrong reasons. The words hung in the air like a physical presence, impossible to ignore or take back. Marcus's face went through a series of emotions: shock, hurt, anger, and finally, a kind of desperate determination. This is insane, he said, standing up and beginning to pace the small room. We have 200 people out there celebrating our marriage. We have a honeymoon planned. We've signed a lease on an apartment together. We've made plans for our entire future. You can't throw all of that away because of some romantic fantasy inspired by a piece of paper. Camilla realized that Marcus was right about the practical realities. Their lives were now legally and financially intertwined. They had built a shared social circle, made joint decisions about their careers and living situation. Undoing all of that would be complicated, expensive, and emotionally devastating for both of them and everyone who loved them. But as she thought about her grandmother's words, about the idea of spending 40 years wondering about the path not taken, she felt a clarity that was both terrifying and liberating. She thought about the man her grandmother had mentioned, Antonio, and wondered if he had spent his life thinking about Isabella, if he had married someone else while carrying the memory of a love that never had the chance to fully bloom. I need to know more, Camilla said finally. I need to understand what my grandmother was really telling me. This note wasn't written randomly. She placed it in that necklace knowing that someday I would find it, probably on my wedding day. She was trying to warn me, to give me the choice she never felt she had. Marcus stopped pacing and stared at his wife with disbelief. So what are you saying, Camilla? That you want to annul our marriage? That you want to throw away everything we've built together to chase some fantasy about what true love should feel like? The question forced Camilla to confront the magnitude of what she was considering. The legal and social ramifications of ending their marriage so soon after the ceremony would be enormous. Their families would be devastated, their reputations would suffer, and the financial costs would be significant. But more than that, she would be hurting Marcus, a good man who had never done anything to deserve having his life turned upside down on what should have been one of the happiest days of his life. He had entered into their marriage with honest intentions, believing they were building a life based on mutual respect and compatible goals. I don't know what I'm saying, Camilla admitted, her voice breaking with emotion. I only know that I can't pretend this note doesn't exist, that I can't ignore what my grandmother was trying to tell me. I need time to think, to understand what this all means. Jessica, who had remained silent throughout most of this conversation, finally stepped forward. Camilla, honey, maybe you should consider that your grandmother might have been wrong. Maybe she was looking back on her life with regret that wasn't really justified. From everything you've told me about your grandparents, they had a beautiful marriage. They raised wonderful children. They supported each other through decades of challenges and joys. But what if that wasn't enough for her? Camilla asked. What if she spent all those years knowing she could have had something more, something deeper and more authentic? What if I'm about to sentence myself to the same kind of regret? The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on the vestry door. Roberto's voice came through the wood. gentle but concerned. Mija, people are starting to ask questions. The caterer needs to know when to serve dinner, and the band is ready to start the dancing. Whatever is happening in there, it needs to be resolved soon. Camilla looked at the faces of the people who loved her most in the world, her mother, her best friend, her new husband, and realized that whatever decision she made would cause pain to someone she cared about. There was no choice that would leave everyone happy and satisfied. But as she held her grandmother's note, feeling the weight of decades of regret and unfulfilled longing, she knew that she couldn't simply return to the reception and pretend that nothing had changed. The knowledge of Isabella's secret had altered something fundamental in her understanding of herself and what she wanted from life. "I need to go home," she said quietly. "I need to look through my grandmother's things to see if there are other clues about Antonio, about the choice she made. I need to understand her story before I can figure out my own." Marcus looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and growing anger. "Home? Camilla, we're supposed to be leaving for our honeymoon tomorrow. We're supposed to be starting our married life together. You can't just walk away from our wedding reception to go digging through old papers." "Then come with me," Camilla said, reaching for his hand. "Help me understand this. Help me figure out what it means for us." For a moment, she saw something soften in Marcus's expression, a flicker of the man who had first attracted her with his kindness and stability. But then his face hardened again, and she realized that he saw her request as a betrayal of everything they had built together. "I'm not going to enable this fantasy, Camilla. I'm not going to help you destroy our marriage based on the regrets of a woman who died 2 years ago. If you walk out of here tonight, if you choose some romantic notion over the real, substantial life we planned together, then you're making that choice alone." The ultimatum hung between them like a chasm that neither could cross. Camilla understood that Marcus was trying to protect what they had built, trying to save their marriage from being destroyed by doubts and questions that might have no real answers. But she also understood that she couldn't move forward into their future, carrying the weight of her grandmother's secret and her own growing certainty that she had married the wrong man for the wrong reasons. The decision, when it came, felt both inevitable and terrifying. Camilla carefully folded her grandmother's note and slipped it into the small purse she had carried down the aisle. She looked at Marcus one last time, memorizing his face, aware that this might be the last moment they shared as husband and wife. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words carrying the weight of all the pain she was about to cause, all the dreams she was about to shatter. "I'm so sorry, Marcus. You deserve someone who can love you the way you deserve to be loved. And I need to find out if I'm capable of feeling that kind of love for someone." Without waiting for his response, Camilla gathered up her wedding dress and walked toward the door, leaving behind the reception, the gifts, the carefully planned honeymoon, and the life she had thought she wanted. Behind her, she could hear Marcus calling her name, his voice breaking with emotion and disbelief. But she didn't turn back. For the first time in her adult life, Camilla Rodriguez was choosing the uncertain path, the one that led toward questions rather than answers, toward the possibility of discovering who she really was beneath all the expectations and obligations that had shaped her choices. As she stepped out of the cathedral into the warm evening air, still wearing her wedding dress and carrying her grandmother's secret, Camilla felt both terrified and exhilarated. She had no idea what she would find in her grandmother's belongings, no guarantee that she would ever locate the mysterious Antonio, no assurance that she had made the right choice. But for the first time in months, possibly years, she felt like she was living her own life rather than following a script written by other people's expectations. And that feeling, terrifying as it was, felt more real than anything she had experienced in the cathedral that day. 3 days had passed since Camilla had walked away from her wedding reception, and she found herself sitting in the middle of her grandmother's bedroom floor, surrounded by decades of carefully preserved memories. The room had remained largely unchanged since Isabella's death 2 years earlier, kept exactly as it had been by Elena, who couldn't bring herself to pack away the belongings of the woman who had been the heart of their family. The wedding dress hung in the closet like a ghost of the life Camilla had abandoned, while she wore simple jeans and one of her grandmother's soft cotton blouses. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and her eyes were red from crying and lack of sleep. The past 3 days have been a whirlwind of difficult conversations, hurt feelings, and painful revelations that had left her feeling raw and uncertain about everything she thought she knew about her family and herself. Marcus had called repeatedly for the first day, his messages ranging from angry demands that she return home immediately to heartbroken pleas for her to reconsider her decision. But when she finally answered his call on the second day, their conversation had been brief and devastating. He had already contacted a lawyer about annulment proceedings, his voice cold and distant as he informed her that he would be moving out of their shared apartment and that she should make arrangements to collect her belongings. "I can't live with the uncertainty, Camilla," he had said, his words clipped and formal. "I can't be married to someone who might wake up one day and decide our entire life together was a mistake. I thought I was marrying a woman who was committed to building something real and lasting. I was wrong about who you are." The accusation had stung, particularly because Camilla wasn't entirely sure he was wrong. She had always prided herself on being reliable, practical, and committed to seeing things through. Walking away from her marriage after 3 days went against everything she had believed about her own character. But, as painful as Marcus's words had been, they also reinforced her growing conviction that she had married him for the wrong reasons. Elena had been surprisingly supportive of her daughter's decision, though Camilla could see the worry and confusion in her mother's eyes. "I've been thinking about your grandmother differently since we found that note," Elena had said the evening after the wedding. "I'm remembering things I dismissed at the time, moments when she seemed distant or sad for no apparent reason. Maybe you're right to want to understand her story before you commit to repeating it." Now, surrounded by boxes of photographs, letters, and personal mementos, Camilla was beginning to piece together a picture of her grandmother that was both familiar and completely foreign. Isabella had been a meticulous keeper of memories, saving everything from movie ticket stubs to pressed flowers, but she had been careful about what stories those memories told. The photographs were chronologically organized in leather albums, and Camilla could see the progression of Isabella's life from a vibrant young woman in 1960s Mexico to the grandmother she remembered. But there was a gap in the timeline, a period of about 2 years in the early 1960s that was represented by only a handful of formal family portraits and no personal snapshots or mementos. It was in a small wooden jewelry box, hidden beneath layers of tissue paper and baby clothes that had been saved from Elena's childhood, that Camilla found the first real clue about the mysterious Antonio. The box contained a bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon, written in Spanish in what was clearly a man's handwriting. The paper was yellowed with age, and some of the ink had faded to a pale brown, but the emotions conveyed in the careful script were still powerful enough to make Camilla's heart race. With her limited Spanish, supplemented by an online translation tool, Camilla slowly worked her way through the letters. They painted a picture of a passionate romance between Isabella and a young man named Antonio Herrera, a teacher and aspiring writer who had been courting her in the small town where she had grown up. The letters were filled with poetry, declarations of love, and plans for a future together that involved travel, adventure, and a shared commitment to education and social justice. "Mi querida Isabella," one letter began. "Your letter yesterday filled my heart with such joy that I could barely concentrate on my students. To know that you share my dreams of seeing the world together, of building a life based on love rather than convention, makes me feel like the luckiest man alive. I have been saving every peso I can, and by next summer, I believe we will have enough money to travel to the United States together, to start fresh where our love will not be constrained by the expectations of our families." As Camilla read letter after letter, she began to understand the depth of feeling that her grandmother had carried for this man. Antonio wrote about books they had read together, about long walks where they discussed their hopes and fears, about stolen moments when they could express their love away from the watchful eyes of Isabella's traditional family. But she could also sense, reading between the lines, the growing pressure Isabella was facing to end the relationship and make a more practical choice. Several letters referenced arguments with her parents, warnings from relatives, and offers from other suitors who were considered more suitable matches. I know your family believes I cannot provide for you the way Miguel Herrera can, Antonio wrote in one particularly heartbreaking letter. I know they see my dreams of writing and teaching as impractical fantasies that will leave you poor and struggling. But, mi amor, I would rather struggle with you than live in comfort without you. Love like ours comes once in a lifetime, and to waste it for the sake of security is to deny the very thing that makes life worth living. The last letter in the bundle was different in tone, filled with a desperation that made Camilla's chest tighten with sympathetic pain. It was dated just 3 weeks before Isabella's wedding to Miguel, and Antonio's handwriting was less careful, as if he'd been writing in great emotional distress. Isabella, please reconsider. I know you have given your word to Miguel. I know the preparations are already underway, but it is not too late to change course. I am leaving for Los Angeles next week, with or without you, because I cannot bear to remain here and watch you marry another man. But until the moment you speak those vows, there is still time for you to choose love over duty. Meet me at our place by the river one last time. Let me remind you of what we mean to each other, of the dreams we have shared, of the life we could build together. If you do not come, I will know that you have made your choice, and I will not trouble you again. But if there is any part of you that still loves me, that still believes in what we could have together, then come. Choose us, mi amor. Choose love. Camilla sat holding the letter for a long time, tears streaming down her face as she imagined her grandmother facing the same impossible choice that had brought her to this moment. She could picture Isabella reading these words, torn between duty and desire, between the security her family wanted for her and the adventure her heart craved. Clearly, Isabella had chosen security. She had married Miguel as planned, raised her children, built a respectable life, and carried the secret of her first love for 60 years. But the pain in Antonio's final letter suggested that he had waited by the river alone, that he had left Mexico with a broken heart, never knowing if Isabella had truly wanted to choose duty over their love, or she had simply been too afraid to disappoint her family. The discovery of the letters opened up new questions for Camilla. Had Antonio really gone to Los Angeles? Had he married someone else? Or had he spent his life remembering Isabella the way she had remembered him? Was he still alive? And if so, what would he think about learning that the woman he had loved had spent 6 decades regretting her choice not to meet him that last time? More importantly, what did this revelation mean for Camilla's own situation? She had walked away from Marcus, but she hadn't walked toward anything or anyone else. Unlike her grandmother, she didn't have her own Antonio waiting somewhere, offering an alternative to the safe choice she had made. Elena found her daughter still sitting on the bedroom floor as evening approached, surrounded by the evidence of Isabella's hidden love story. Without speaking, Elena settled down beside her daughter and began looking through the photographs and letters, her face reflecting the same mixture of sadness and revelation that Camilla had been experiencing all day. I never knew, Elena said softly, holding one of Antonio's letters. She never gave any indication that there had been anyone before your grandfather. I always assumed there's been a typical courtship of their generation, arranged by families, but growing into genuine affection over time. Do you think she made the wrong choice? Camilla asked, her voice hoarse from crying and exhaustion. Elena was quiet for a long time, studying a photograph of Isabella on her wedding day. The young woman in the picture was beautiful and elegant, but now that Camilla knew what to look for, she could see a sadness in her grandmother's eyes that she had never noticed before. I think she made the choice that felt safest at the time, Elena said finally. Your grandfather was a good man, and They built a happy life together. But I'm beginning to understand that happiness and fulfillment aren't always the same thing. The conversation was interrupted by the doorbell, followed by the sound of Jessica's voice calling from the front of the house. Camilla's best friend had been checking on her daily, bringing food and moral support while carefully avoiding judgment about the decision to leave Marcus at the altar. "I brought dinner," Jessica announced, appearing in the doorway with bags from Camilla's favorite Mexican restaurant. "And I have news that I think you need to hear." As they settled in the living room with their food, Jessica's expression grew serious. "I've been doing some research on your mysterious Antonio," she said, pulling out her laptop. "I hope you don't mind, but I was curious about what happened to him after he left Mexico." Camilla's heart began to race. She wasn't sure she was ready to learn more about Antonio, particularly if the news was sad or disappointing. But she also knew that she needed to understand the full story if she was going to figure out how to apply her grandmother's wisdom to her own life. "Did you find him?" she asked, barely able to get the words out. "I did," Jessica said, turning the laptop screen toward Camilla and Elena. Antonio Herrera, born in 1940 in Guadalajara, immigrated to the United States in 1963. He became a teacher in East Los Angeles, worked his way through graduate school, and eventually became a principal. He wrote several books about education and Latino history. And Camilla, he never married. The photograph on the screen showed an elderly man with kind eyes and silver hair standing in front of a school that bore his name. He was smiling, but there was something in his expression that reminded Camilla of her grandmother's distant sadness, a sense of something missing or unfulfilled. "He's still alive," Jessica continued. "He's 85 years old and lives in a retirement community in Pasadena. According to this article from last year, he donated his entire estate to educational charities and spent his time mentoring young teachers." Camilla stared at the photograph, trying to reconcile this dignified elderly man with a passionate young suitor whose letters had moved her to tears. Here was the man her grandmother had loved and left behind, the path not taken that had haunted Isabella for the rest of her life. "There's more," Jessica said gently. "The article mentions that he never married because he never got over his first love, a woman he met in Mexico who married someone else. He's quoted as saying that some people are lucky enough to experience true love once in their lives, and that he preferred to honor that memory rather than settle for something less meaningful." The words hit Camilla like a physical blow. Not only had her grandmother spent 60 years regretting her choice, but Antonio had spent the same 60 years honoring the love they had shared, building a meaningful life while carrying the memory of what might have been. Elena reached over and took her daughter's hand. "What are you thinking, Mija?" Camilla looked at the photograph of Antonio, at the letters scattered around the room, at the evidence of a love story that had been interrupted but never forgotten. She thought about her grandmother's final message, urging her to choose love over safety, to learn from the mistake that had defined Isabella's entire life. "I'm thinking that I need to meet him," she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "I need to tell him about Abuela, about how much she loved him, about how she never forgot him. I need to understand what their love looked like, so I can recognize it if I ever find it for myself." Jessica and Elena exchanged glances, clearly concerned about the emotional toll this quest was taking on Camilla. But they also seemed to understand that she needed to follow this path to its conclusion, that she couldn't move forward with her life until she understood the full story of her grandmother's choices. "Are you sure that's wise?" Elena asked gently. "He's an elderly man who has built a life based on memory and loss. Learning about your grandmother's regrets might be more painful than healing for both of you." Camilla considered her mother's warning, but she felt a certainty that was stronger than her fear. "I think he has a right to know that she loved him until the end. I think they both deserve to have their story told completely, even if it's 60 years too late for them to change anything." Over the next hour, they planned Camilla's trip to California. Jessica offered to drive with her, providing both emotional support and practical assistance. Elena insisted on coming as well, recognizing that this journey was about more than Camilla's personal quest for understanding. It was about finally honoring the full truth of Isabella's life and choices. As they made arrangements for the trip, Camilla felt a mixture of anticipation and terror. She was about to meet the great love of her grandmother's life, the man whose memory had shaped Isabella's understanding of what love could be. She had no idea what she would say to him, how she would explain her sudden appearance in his life, or what she hoped to gain from their meeting. But she knew that she couldn't move forward without understanding what her grandmother had been trying to tell her in that final note. She needed to see what true love looked like, even in its unfulfilled form, so she could recognize whether it was something she had ever experienced or something she was still searching for. The last thing Camilla did before going to bed that night was to carefully repack Antonio's letters, knowing that she would be returning them to their rightful owner. As she tied the blue ribbon around the bundle, she whispered a promise to her grandmother's memory. "I'll tell him, Abuela, I'll tell him how much you loved him, and I'll make sure he knows that you never forgot." Outside her window, the night was quiet and full of possibilities. Tomorrow, Camilla would begin a journey that might help her understand not just her grandmother's choices, but her own capacity for the kind of love that was worth any sacrifice, any risk, any leap into the unknown. The retirement community in Pasadena was nothing like what Camilla had imagined. Instead of the sterile, institutional environment she had expected, Villa Santa Rosa was a vibrant complex of Spanish-style buildings surrounded by lush gardens and courtyards where residents gathered to read, play cards, and engage in animated conversations. The California sunshine cast everything in a warm, golden light that made the place feel more like a resort than a care facility. Camilla sat in her rental car for nearly 20 minutes, watching the entrance and trying to gather the courage to walk inside. She had called ahead and arranged a meeting with Antonio Herrera, introducing herself simply as the granddaughter of someone he had known in Mexico many years ago. The receptionist had been kind and accommodating, explaining that Mr. Herrera loved visitors and would be delighted to meet with her in the community's comfortable visiting lounge. Elena and Jessica flanked her as they finally approached the main building, both women providing silent moral support for what was arguably the most emotionally significant encounter of Camilla's life. She carried a small bag containing Antonio's letters, the broken pearl necklace, and a few photographs of Isabella from various stages of her life. The visiting lounge was elegant and comfortable, with large windows overlooking a courtyard filled with blooming bougainvillea. Several residents were scattered throughout the space, some reading, others engaged in quiet conversations with family members. Camilla chose a seating area near the windows and settled in to wait, her heart pounding with anticipation and nervousness. When Antonio Herrera entered the room, Camilla recognized him immediately from the photographs Jessica had found online, though seeing him in person was far more powerful than she had anticipated. Despite his 85 years, he moved with dignity and purpose, his silver hair neatly combed and his eyes bright with intelligence and curiosity. He was dressed carefully in pressed slacks and a button-down shirt, and there was something about his bearing that spoke of a life lived with intention and grace. But what struck Camilla most profoundly was how much he reminded her of her grandmother. Not in physical appearance, but in the way he carried himself, the thoughtful expression in his eyes, the sense that he was someone who had spent decades thinking deeply about life and love and loss. "You must be Camilla," he said, approaching with a warm smile and extending his hand. "I must admit, I've been curious about this meeting ever since you called. It's not often that someone wants to talk about my distant past in Mexico." His voice was accented but clear, carrying the authority of someone who had spent a lifetime as an educator. There was kindness in his expression, but also a sharpness that suggested his mind remained keen despite his advanced age. "Mr. Herrera, thank you so much for agreeing to meet with us," Camilla said, standing to shake his hand. "This is my mother, Elena, and my friend Jessica. I have something to tell you that I think will be significant for you. Antonio's expression grew more serious as he settled into his chair, clearly sensing that this was not a casual social visit. Please call me Antonio. And tell me, who was your grandmother? Someone I knew in Guadalajara. Camilla took a deep breath, aware that the next few words would change everything for this elderly man who had built a life around the memory of a lost love. My grandmother was Isabella Morales. She lived in Guadalajara in the early 1960s, and I believe you knew her quite well. The effect of hearing Isabella's name was immediate and profound. Antonio's face went through a series of expressions: recognition, shock, joy, and then a deep sadness that seemed to age him years in moments. His hands, which had been resting calmly on his lap, began to tremble slightly, and he leaned forward as if he couldn't quite believe what he had heard. Isabella, he whispered, the name sounding like a prayer. Isabella Morales. I have not heard that name spoken aloud in many, many years. He looked directly at Camilla with new intensity. She was your grandmother? But that would mean she married Miguel Rodriguez in 1963, Camilla said gently. They had 3 children together, including my mother, and they lived a good life. But, Antonio, she never forgot you. She carried your memory with her for the rest of her life. Tears began to form in Antonio's eyes, and he reached into his pocket for a handkerchief. Forgive me, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I am an old man, and sometimes the past feels more real than the present. Isabella, how did she live? Was she happy? Did she have the children she always dreamed of? Over the next hour, Camilla shared stories about her grandmother's life, her children, her grandchildren, her involvement in the church, her love of cooking and gardening, her quiet strength and endless generosity. She painted a picture of a woman who had indeed built a meaningful life, who had been loved and respected by everyone who knew her. But she also shared the more difficult truth that she had recently discovered. With great care and sensitivity, Camilla told Antonio about finding the note in the necklace, about Isabella's confession that she had married a good man she didn't love, because it was expected, because it was safe, because she was afraid to disappoint her family. She wrote that she spent 40 years wondering about the path she didn't take, Camilla said, watching Antonio's face as she spoke. She wanted me to know that you were the great love of her life, that choosing security over love was a mistake she regretted until the day she died. Antonio listened in silence, occasionally closing his eyes as if absorbing the pain and beauty of what he was hearing. When Camilla finished speaking, he was quiet for a long time, staring out at the courtyard where other residents were enjoying the afternoon sunshine. I waited for her, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. By the river on that last day. I waited from sunrise until long after sunset, hoping she would come, hoping she would choose to leave with me. When she didn't appear, I knew that she had made her decision, that her family's wishes were more important to her than our love. I don't think that's true, Camilla said urgently. I think she was scared. I think she felt trapped by expectations and obligations. But I don't think she stopped loving you. Antonio smiled sadly, reaching over to pat Camilla's hand with a gesture that reminded her so much of her grandmother that it took her breath away. My dear child, it doesn't matter now why she didn't come. What matters is that we loved each other completely for the time we had, and that love shaped both of our lives in ways that brought meaning and beauty to our existence. But weren't you angry? Jessica asked, speaking for the first time since the introductions. Didn't you feel betrayed or abandoned? For a while, yes, Antonio admitted. I was young and dramatic, and I thought love should conquer every obstacle. But as I got older, I began to understand how difficult Isabella's situation really was. Her family was traditional. They wanted security for her, and I was offering uncertainty and adventure. She made the choice that felt safest, and I cannot fault her for that. Camilla reached into her bag and carefully withdrew the bundle of letters tied with the blue ribbon. These belong to you, she said, placing them in Antonio's hands. She kept them all these years. Every single letter you wrote to her." Antonio stared at the letters as if they were sacred relics, his fingers tracing the faded ribbon with infinite tenderness. "She kept them? All of them. Every one. And there's something else." Camilla pulled out the broken pearl necklace, the clasp still damaged from its dramatic failure during the wedding ceremony. This was her wedding necklace, passed down from her mother. The note was hidden inside the clasp. "I think she wanted me to find it someday, to understand the choice she made and learn from her experience." Antonio examined the necklace carefully, and suddenly his expression changed to one of recognition and wonder. "This necklace. I remember this necklace. Isabella wore it the last time I saw her, 2 days before her wedding. We met secretly in the market, and I begged her one final time to reconsider. She touched this necklace and said it represented her family's expectations, their dreams for her future. I never imagined she would hide a message inside it." The revelation that Antonio had actually seen the necklace created a connection across the decades that left all 4 people in the visiting lounge sitting in emotional silence. Camilla could picture the scene, her young grandmother meeting her lover in secret, torn between duty and desire, wearing the same necklace that would eventually carry her warning to future generations. "Antonio," Elena said softly, "what would you want Camilla to know about love? What would you want her to understand about the choice my mother made?" Antonio considered the question carefully, his hands still holding the letters that represented the most passionate period of his life. "I would want her to know that love takes many forms, and that there is no single right way to live a life. Your grandmother and I shared something beautiful and intense, but it existed in a specific time and place. She chose stability and family, and from what you have told me, she built a meaningful life around that choice. But she regretted it," Camilla protested. "She wrote that note to warn me against making the same mistake." "Perhaps," Antonio said. "Or perhaps she was simply acknowledging that every choice involves sacrifice, and that wondering about alternatives is part of the human experience. The important thing is not to avoid all regret, but to make choices that align with your authentic self." Over the next 2 hours, Antonio shared his own story, how he had channeled his heartbreak into a passion for education, how he had devoted his life to helping young people find their own paths, how he had never married because he felt it would be unfair to expect another woman to compete with the memory of his first love. "I don't regret staying single," he said firmly. "Isabella showed me what deep connection could feel like, and I prefer to honor that memory rather than settle for something less meaningful. But that was my choice, and it was right for me. It might not be right for someone else." As the afternoon began to fade into evening, Camilla realized that her conversation with Antonio was providing her with something more valuable than simple answers about love and marriage. He was showing her that it was possible to live authentically, to make choices based on personal truth rather than social expectation, and to find meaning and purpose even when life doesn't follow the conventional script. "Antonio, I need to tell you something about my own situation," Camilla said, gathering her courage. "I found my grandmother's note on my wedding day, 3 hours after I had married a man I realized I didn't truly love. I walked away from my reception, left my new husband, and came here looking for answers about what real love should feel like." Antonio's expression grew very serious, and he leaned forward with the focused attention of someone who understood the magnitude of what Camilla was sharing. "That was a courageous decision, but also a difficult one. What did you hope to find here?" "I wanted to understand what my grandmother meant when she wrote about choosing love over safety. I wanted to see what the great love of her life looked like, to understand whether I had ever felt anything that powerful for anyone. And what have you discovered?" Camilla thought about the question, reflecting on the conversations with Marcus, the research into her grandmother's hidden past, and now this encounter with Antonio. "I've learned that settling for good enough in love is a betrayal of my own heart. I've learned that my grandmother was trying to save me from spending my life wondering about what might have been. And I've learned that it's better to be alone and authentic than married and living someone else's idea of what my life should look like. Antonio nodded approvingly. Those are wise insights. But let me ask you this. What will you do with this knowledge? How will you move forward? The question forced Camilla to confront the reality that understanding her grandmother's story was only the beginning of figuring out her own path. She had left Marcus, discovered family secrets, and gained new insights about love and authenticity. But she still needed to build a life moving forward, to find her own way of honoring the lessons she had learned. I think I need to start over, she said slowly. I need to figure out who I am when I'm not trying to meet everyone else's expectations. I need to discover what I'm passionate about, what kind of life I want to build, what kind of love I'm capable of giving and receiving. That sounds like a worthy journey, Antonio said with a smile. And it sounds like something your grandmother will be proud of you for undertaking. As their visit came to an end, Antonio insisted on giving Camilla something to remember their meeting. From his apartment, he retrieved a leather-bound journal filled with his thoughts, poetry, and reflections on life and love. Inside the front cover, he had written an inscription that brought tears to Camilla's eyes. For Camilla, Isabella's granddaughter, may you find the courage to write your own love story, one that honors both your heart and your heritage. With gratitude for bringing Isabella's memory back to life. The drive back to the hotel was quiet, each woman processing the emotional weight of the afternoon. Camilla felt simultaneously drained and energized, grief-stricken, and hopeful. Meeting Antonio had confirmed that her grandmother's love for him had been real and profound, but it had also shown her that love could take many forms and that there was no single right way to honor deep feelings. That evening, as she sat in her hotel room reading through Antonio's journal, Camilla began to understand that her grandmother's note hadn't been just a warning about choosing safety over passion. It had been an invitation to live authentically, to make choices based on her own truth rather than other people's expectations, and to believe that she was worthy of the kind of love that made all the risk and uncertainty worthwhile. The broken pearl necklace sat on the bedside table, its clasp still damaged, its secret finally revealed. But somehow it looked different now, not broken but transformed. It had served its purpose, carrying Isabella's message across the decades, and helping Camilla understand that sometimes the most important family traditions are the ones that encourage us to break free from limiting patterns and forge our own paths. 6 months later, Camilla stood in the art gallery where her first photography exhibition was being displayed. The collection, titled Hidden Stories, featured portraits and landscapes that explored the secret lives and untold narratives that exist within every family, every relationship, every carefully constructed public facade. She had used the money from the canceled wedding and honeymoon to enroll in the photography program she had abandoned years earlier to pursue a more practical career. The work was challenging and uncertain, but it fed her soul in ways that her previous life had never done. Marcus had moved on quickly, as she had expected he would. Through mutual friends, she had heard that he was already engaged to someone else, a woman who shared his goals and values, and who wouldn't question the life they built together. Camilla felt no jealousy or regret about this news, only gratitude that he had found someone who could love him the way he deserved to be loved. Antonio had become a regular correspondent, sending letters that continued the conversation they had begun in that Pasadena visiting room. His insights about life, love, and authenticity had become a source of guidance as Camilla navigated her new independence and worked to discover her own voice as an artist and as a woman. Elena stood beside her daughter at the gallery opening, proudly introducing Camilla to friends and strangers who were drawn to the powerful emotions captured in the photographs. The centerpiece of the exhibition was a portrait of the broken pearl necklace, photographed in dramatic lighting that made it appear both fragile and strong, damaged and beautiful. "I'm proud of you, Mija," Elena said as they watched people moving through the gallery, engaging with the stories Camilla had chosen to tell through her lens. "Your grandmother will be proud too." You found the courage to choose your own path. Camilla smiled, touching the small pearl pendant she now wore. A single pearl from the broken necklace, reset in a simple gold setting that she had designed herself. It served as a reminder of her grandmother's love, Antonio's wisdom, and her own decision to honor her authentic self rather than society's expectations. As the evening progressed, Camilla found herself in conversation with Dr. Sarah Chun, a psychologist who had been drawn to the exhibition's exploration of family secrets and hidden truths. Dr. Chun shared her own research about the psychological impact of living authentically versus conforming to social expectations, and their conversation evolved into a discussion about collaboration on future projects that would help other people find the courage to live their own truths. You know, Dr. Chun said as the gallery began to empty, what you've done with your grandmother's story is remarkable. You've taken a family secret and transformed it into a message of hope and empowerment. That takes real courage. Camilla looked around the gallery one more time, taking in the faces of the people who had been moved by her work. The conversations that had started because she had chosen to share her grandmother's story, the connections that had been made because she had found the courage to live authentically. The broken necklace had indeed revealed its secret, but that secret had become the foundation for something beautiful and meaningful. Just as Antonio had channeled his lost love into a life of service and education, Camilla had transformed her wedding day revelation into art that touched other people's lives and encouraged them to examine their own choices and possibilities. As she locked up the gallery and walked out into the warm evening air, Camilla felt the profound satisfaction of knowing that she was finally living her own story rather than following someone else's script. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges and possibilities she couldn't yet imagine. But she was walking it with authenticity, courage, and the knowledge that she was honoring both her grandmother's legacy and her own truth. The broken necklace had done its work, revealing not just the secret it had carried for decades, but the strength and authenticity that had been waiting inside Camilla all along, waiting for the right moment to emerge and transform her life into something genuine, meaningful, and entirely her own.